我哋今次嘅監察西九文化區計劃嘅聯合小組委員會會議。咁我哋首先呢，就請呢個西九管理局同埋政府嘅代表進入，好嗎？咁啊，出席嘅政府人員同埋西九管理局嘅人員呢，都喺大家嘅議程嘅文件嘅裏邊。歡迎大家。我哋今日咧就兩個議程，就去到1點鐘嚇。咁議程第一項咧就係 M+ 嘅發展最新嘅進展。咁之前文件已經係交俾咗大家。咁我哋咧就先請政府嘅代表或者西九嘅代表簡介呢個文件，同埋利用嗰個投影片係同大家説明，好嘛？邊位先？Hi, Mr. Lynch, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee. Oh, something's gone wrong. There we are. Today, I think it's a really important part of us being able to make clear to the committee what an absolutely integral part M+ is of the West Kowloon Cultural District, and also very important in that it sits in the park end of the project, unaffected by any of the issues related to the railway or the basement. It will be one of the first venues open to the public, and it will be very important in terms of its relationship to the broad audience. We've made some, I think, very significant progress over the past year in the development of M+, including the building of a team, the building of the collection, building the museum building, as well as raising public awareness through a number of the inventive pre-opening programs that we've undertaken, including inflation, the M+ building exhibition, and in particular the joint collaboration with the Arts Development Council of responsibility for the last Venice Biennale with the artist Lee Kit, and the recently announced collaboration with the ADC for the next Venice Biennale next year. I think one of the issues that we're very aware of is that M+ is a new type of museum of contemporary visual culture, unlike anything seen in Hong Kong before, particularly in the not-for-profit sector. We realise it takes time and a very conscious effort to educate and communicate to the public what a visual culture museum is and how such a museum works. This is not an easy task, but it is definitely a very important part of the journey that we would go through going forward. I'm very pleased today to be able to have the M+ director, Lars Netver, who's led the team and built the team so that we now have some 48 people now working on the development of the museum, the development of the collection. I think we're doing a pretty good job in terms of moving it forward on a lot of fronts, and that's clearly one of the challenges of this project. And I think we're bringing the best practice from all over the world to ensure that M+ will be a museum that Hong Kong is rightly proud of. And I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Netver to bring you up to date on all of the aspects, including the building part of the project and any of the areas that you may want to question us specifically on. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. 有冇政府有冇補充？其他人你好 ，Mr. Lee。
Chairman, and thank you, Michael, also for this introduction. Well, some of you may have been on this committee for 3 years or more. And for me, it's the fourth time I have the privilege to sit here and report on the development of M+. Just in general, I must say that everything is developing according to plan, timely, and actually without any major hiccups, which is quite wonderful to be able to report. I've always said that we're basically doing 4 things. We are building a team that develops ideas, etc., and from these ideas you then start building a collection, which we have come quite far with. And once the collection sort of is taking shape, we start developing the ideas of what sort of building do we need for the collection. And then the 4th strand is, of course, to develop audiences and the relationship with audiences. And this is what we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. For the period there's been a team on board, and we continue. In the past years, the district, WKCDA and M+ has made significant progress in a number of areas, including collection and acquisition, museum facilities, governance structure, capacity building, audience building, as well as stakeholder engagement. And I will talk to you about these things. When it comes to the collection, just to look at some figures around it. As of June, 30th of June 2014, M+ has acquired, and here I exclude the major acquisition through purchase and mainly donation of the M+ SIG collection. We have acquired around 920 works on top of that. In terms of value, geographical distribution of these acquisitions, it's quite balanced in terms of its relationship between Hong Kong, China, other parts of Asia, Chinese diaspora, and overseas beyond Asia. And if you look at the number of works from Hong Kong, it's a bit over 50% of the total number of works purchased since 2012, when we started making the acquisitions. It's not yet 2 years ago when the acquisition process started. The roadmaps, and these are really the maps that define the directions to go, the order to take things, where to go first, and sort of strategies for acquisition. The roadmaps for different collection areas, such as ink art, for example, design, the Greater Asia collection, have been presented to the Interim Acquisition Committee already last year. And M+ is currently conducting an in-depth research and developing the strategy for the Hong Kong visual culture, and a sort of deepened strategy, I should say. There is already a strategy in place, and for moving image. And the latter, actually, the roadmap for that was presented as late as yesterday to the Interim Acquisition Committee. This committee held 7 meetings during the financial year of 2013-14. And looking at the period from the 1st of April 2013 until the 30th of June, so very recently, 2014, acquisitions by purchase was totaling 352 works of visual culture. So clearly it's not only art, it's design, it's architecture, it's moving image material as well. That's important to remember. And out of these, 79 were from Hong Kong. Now, I think something that is often forgotten and not commented on much, but which is quite remarkable and a sign of extraordinary support for the M+ project, is the interest M+ has attracted from major artists, collectors, architects and designers who have made various important donations, including, for example, the generous donation of 37 important works of Chinese contemporary art, mainly installations, very substantial installations, from Mr. Guan Yi, who is one of the most important art collectors in China. The donation also, I should mention the donation of the work Guards Kissing by Tino Segal, who's one of the major international artists at the time, from Mr. Alan Lau, who's an avid collector of contemporary art here in Hong Kong. We had a quite extraordinary anonymous donation to support the acquisition of Asian Field by Anthony Gormley. And we had recently a cash donation, which has been written about quite a bit in the newspaper, in the name of the Brown Family Annual Acquisition Fund for acquiring artworks at Art Basel, Hong Kong in the coming 10 years. So at the 30th of June 2014, M+ has received 2,029 artworks and other items of design, architecture, moving image from 51 different donors. Artists, Hong Kong artists, artists overseas, collectors, architects, designers, and so forth. And as well as the two donations, cash donations, with a value of totaling Hong Kong dollars 1,350,350,000 Hong Kong dollars. And I should say that in the same period of time, we have made purchases for about 325 million Hong Kong dollars. So we have received donations of a value of more than 1 billion more than we have purchased for, and I think that's worth noting. Of course, we will continue our effort in securing more donations, and there are very good signs that we will get those. And actually, we had an informal confirmation of a large cash donation yesterday, but it's too early to announce it publicly in detail. To underline its commitment to transparency, WKSDA has published the M+ acquisition policy, which was developed based on the policies of major museums in the United States, America, Canada, as well as Australia, and in consultation with the Independent Commission Against Corruption. The approving procedures and limits are laid down in the policy, and they are comparable to those of many major international museums. As a matter of fact, both the policy and the procedures are, I would say, more extensive and firmer than in most international museums. For instance, the M+ needs to seek approval from the WKSDA board before making major acquisitions. And then, depending on the price value of the proposed acquisition, the M+ acquisition policy sets out different acquisition approval authorities, which comprise members of strong arts and cultural background. And I think this is really important, that decisions about acquisitions are made by people who have a knowledge in the field, that you don't hand it over to people who don't know much about the field. In addition, the complete list of the M+ SIG collection, as well as other recent acquisitions and donations, have been uploaded on the WKSDA official website for public information. To move over to the museum building, and you may remember that for M+, it's an important reminder always to say that the museum should not be confused with the building. The museum is really a content and its relationship to its audiences. And the building is a tool for this relationship. It's a tool to bridge the gap, to create this meeting between the content, the artworks, the design works, the architecture models, and the public. But it's not the same as the museum. So in a sense, you can say that M+ exists as a museum already, because besides the building, everything else is in place that you can compare with a sort of mid-sized museum. We have an excellent team, we have a growing collection, we have an exhibition program, we have a relationship to our audiences on a very regular basis, just like museums do. The museum, the building is missing. I'd like, though, to say a few words about the building, because it is important and it is a big investment as well, and it is moving forward very well. As members may remember, the winning design for the M+ building was, well, the design competition to start with was won about a year ago by the Swiss architect firm Herzog & de Meuron in joint venture with Hong Kong-based TFP Farrells and Uwe Arup and Partners Hong Kong, and it's called the HDM joint venture. And they were selected from a short list of an international competition, of which with 6 of the world's leading architecture firms participated, 5 of which at the present have won the Pritzker Prize, the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for an architect. So it was from quite an extraordinary team they were selected. The winning design for the M+ building is, and I will show some images, is made up of basically 2 slabs. A horizontal slab and a vertical slab. Slab is an ugly word actually, but pieces of a building. And in general you can say that the horizontal slab has a number of functions. It starts underground already, where you have public facilities, you have an entrance from the park, you come to the extraordinary space called the Found Space, which is actually as an excavation of the Airport Express tunnel, which gives us a phenomenal and unusual type of space in the underground. But also it houses, for example, the Moving Image Center, which is a totally unique aspect of the museum. And you can enter it already straight from the park and from the park promenade. Sorry. Okay. Next floor is a public plaza for the public, and that's the main entrance floor, but also with education facilities. And the next floor is the main exhibition space. The vertical part has the research center, library, archive, accessible to the public. It has curatorial research center. It has 3 floors on the top that are restaurants for RDE simply. And this building, because there were questions about this, so there has been earlier on, is the conservation storage facility, which is actually part of the same building, and it's attached underground to the museum and houses our storage with thousands of works and also the conservation facilities. This is another view from the sea showing, I can highlight here the education center, which is an extraordinary feature in the building. And of course you can also see the wonderful large roof terrace, which has public access. It's actually open public space. And yet another view that shows the sort of easy access, openness into the building, which is from the Artist Square into the museum building, and how easily accessed it is. Moving on, I should say that the M+ Design Consultancy Services commenced in September 2013, so it's about 10 months ago. Detailed design, we've gone through conceptual design or schematic design, and detailed design is progressing well and is due for completion in December 2014. Now, as the Finance Committee of the Legislative Council has not been able to consider the funding application of the advanced public infrastructure works in the M+ portion of the integrated basement as scheduled for July 2014 for last week, it is anticipated, unfortunately I must say, that the completion date, the OP, for M+ will be revised from the end of 2017 to the first half of 2018. At the same time, though, the advanced works for M+ commenced on the 1st of April 2014 and is expected to be completed in August 2014. Also, in keeping with WKCD's prudent financial management, regular reviews are being undertaken to monitor the estimated construction cost. Value engineering studies, etc., has constantly been going on and will continue to form a part of the ongoing design management and cost control activities. And at the present, but of course that is just at the present, we are, according to the quantity surveyors, on budget. Another important aspect is the governance structure. Following the recommendations of the Consultative Committee of the Core Arts and Culture Facilities of the WKSDA, as well as the report to them from the Museum Advisory Group in 2006, WKSDA has studied the governance structure of major museums overseas to consider how the future M+ should be managed. For the purposes of removing legal ambiguity in the eyes of the public dealing with a museum, administrative transparency, accountability and efficiency, and of maximizing public perception of the artistic freedom and curatorial independence of M+, the governance of M+ would be implemented through the establishment of a wholly owned subsidiary company under WKSDA as a separate legal entity. Under the WKSDA, I should underline. Under this model, the WKSDA board will be the body setting overall policies for the governance of WKSDA, including M+, and the overall strategic direction for the WKSDA, while the new M+ board for the wholly owned subsidiary shall develop the mandate, mission, vision and operating strategies for M+. M+ would retain control over its museological and curatorial policies, and the M+ board would hold the authority to approve the daily work and decisions within defined levels. This would allow for more effective and streamlined operations of the museum. M+ management and governance need to be compliant with the policies of WKSDA, and WKSDA is currently working out further details to implement the governance structure. Capacity building. Of course, building the team has been a central and a totally essential aspect of creating M+. And we have gradually been building up our professional expertise in different areas, including, of course, curatorial practice, collection management, art education, research, and technical areas, especially the back-of-house areas. Currently, the recruitment focus is on curatorial and collection management areas. This is to ensure that M+ will have the requisite curatorial expertise in each of the 4 main visual culture areas and the expertise in managing the ever-expanding M+ collection, of course. The focus will also slowly shift towards the areas of audience development, digital program, publications, membership and building management. M+ currently has a total of, actually we're around moving rapidly towards 40 members of staff, with 18 in the curatorial area, actually 19 as of yesterday. 6 in the collection management, 1 in the building area, and the rest are executive or administrative staff. And of the now 19 curatorial staff, 10 are actually young curators from Hong Kong. They're not the only curators from Hong Kong, but that shows that it's really possible to recruit young, talented, well-educated, but maybe in some cases unexperienced curators in Hong Kong who can grow in the organization. Well, internship, I thought you were interested in this. Internship and volunteer programs to meet the increased demand for artistic and administrative talents, as well as curatorial, art education and back-of-house staff. M+ has launched different internship and volunteer programs. All in all, I think we've had around 20 interns over time, and some of them are now coming into the team also. And the docent volunteer program was launched last year. We had about 800 applications for it. We have at the current 47 who are in an education program with us, and it's anticipated that it will continue in the coming years. Audience building. Of course, the main strategy for building audiences is really by having a public program, by showing, by having people participate. And the main vehicle there are the exhibitions we make, the mobile M+ exhibitions, and the exhibition as we did last year in Venice, where we organized together with ADC the presentation of a Venice artist, Lee Kitt, and the exhibition UU, which had an extraordinarily good reception in Venice and internationally. An exhibition that later came back in an expanded version to Hong Kong under the title You in the Cattle Depot. Other exhibitions that have been hugely successful is Building M+, the museum and architecture collection, which presented the architecture competition, where we are at this stage in the design of the M+ building, and also our growing architecture collection. And it was an exhibition that attracted more than 20,000 visitors out in artistry. Other exhibitions are, as I mentioned, the Lee Kit exhibition and the Mobile M+ neonscience.hk, which was an interactive online exhibition dedicated to exploring, mapping and documenting Hong Kong's neon signs. And since there has been questions about where popular culture went in our program, this is a good example of how we work with popular culture. To evaluate the outcome of UU...
最後1分鐘啊。
1 minute? Well, it's up to you. We have ADC has come back and said that they invite us to do the next exhibition in Venice as well, in collaboration with them. M+ has accepted the invitation, and a press announcement was made on the 26th of June 2014, and the artist was announced 10 days ago, and it's Sang King-Hwa from Hong Kong, of course. We also did a very successful exhibition at the Hong Kong Art Basel, and on top of that I can report about M+ Matters, very, very successful, always sold out programs of public talks and workshops. And finally, stakeholder engagements, where we regularly do the public forums that are also very popular and well visited, where we update the public in a similar way as we've done now, but at greater length about how the project is developing. Thank you, Chairman.
好，多謝你啊！你已經用咗25分鐘講咗㗎啦嚇。咁而家咧報名嘅咧就係有黃碧雲、姚思榮、副主席陳婉霞、就係何秀蘭同埋毛孟靜。我會最後每人4分鐘，連問連答，掌握時間。我哋呢節咧會12點鐘結束。11點10結束嚇。
多謝主席，我想問下咧就兩方面嘅問題啦。第一個咧就係關於 M+ 嘅博物館啦。呢度提到咧，我哋好希望佢係有一個香港嘅角度嘅，係有一個香港嘅特色嘅，係會有香港嘅視覺文化同埋流動影像嘅。咁咧就關於第5點嗰度。即係呢一個香港嘅視覺文化同埋流動影像。嗱，我哋希望咧呢個 M+ 咧唔係一個即係好似我哋去旅行去其他國家睇人哋嘅大型嘅博物館咁。即係呢啲我哋去旅行，即係啲市民都會出去出邊啦。我哋唔希望我哋翻到嚟 M+ 咧又好似去咗旅行咁，睇一啲咧係冇一個本地嘅特色。我哋好希望佢係有嗰個獨特本地嘅獨特性。一睇嘅時候，香港市民入去覺得呢個係我哋嘅一個 visual culture， 係我哋嘅視覺文化，係我哋香港嘅本土藝術。所以呢個本土性嗰個 local visual culture、local visual history 呢啲呢，我好希望喺呢一個策展或者你喺收購一啲嘅物品嘅時候呢，係一定要突出佢。如果唔係，呢個就唔係我哋香港人嘅一個 M+， 而係一個我哋將一個外國嘅舶來品擠喺本地。咁我希望你哋喺成個構思裏邊係令到香港人係會有共鳴嘅。咁所以呢度咧，我想問啊，就好多人咧形容香港係一個示威遊行之都，因為每年1月1號、6月4號、7月1號，跟住唔知10月1號嚇唔知啊，總之好多大型嘅動員示威，無論邊個搞都好，呢啲都係香港好重要嘅一個文化本地文化特色。或者嗰個視覺文化特色，呢啲相關嘅照片啦、影像啦，有冇展開一個計劃收購，或者係呼籲啲 NGO 佢哋係捐出有關嘅物品，然後會有一個咁樣嘅展館呢？咁即係呢個係第一個問題。第二個呢，就係關於嗰個嘅第16段嗰個 governance 15、16咁將來咧就而家講緊咧，就係話喺西九管理局底下咧，會有一個全資附屬嘅公司去睇住 M+ 嘅，而呢度亦都會有一個 M+ 嘅董事局。 咁但係呢度完全冇提到個董事局呢係將會有幾多人啦，嗰個組成會係點啦，嗰個 representation 會係點啦，有幾多即係好熟悉香港 visual culture 嘅人係會喺呢一度啦。咁因為呢度你講到咧，新嘅 M+ 董事局咧係要負責制定佢嘅目標、使命、願景同埋營運策略。即係我就好擔心嘅，因為你呢度冇組成，然後又話交俾佢哋去定 M+ 嘅目標、使命同願景。即係具體營運策略，當然佢哋可以慢慢傾。但係呢啲咁大嘅目標願景，唔係應該我哋已經大家即係喺呢一度都應該要傾清楚，或者西九管理局應該已經係有一個好清楚嘅指示咩？定係仲要交俾一個新生出嚟嘅董事局，而佢係諗一啲咩嘢？佢係可以會同西九管理局唔一致嘅咩？係冇可能噶嘛，係嘛？可唔可以講一講呢兩個問題
？OK， 邊位精簡啲嘅回答兩個問題 ？Mr. Lynch or else？
So, yeah, no, I'm happy to answer. To start with, of course, I completely agree that M+ should not be like any museum overseas. It should definitely be unique to Hong Kong, and there's no point in creating it otherwise. And actually, people would have no reason to go there from overseas, even if it's the same as they can get anywhere else. So clearly, it's meant to reflect Hong Kong, but also, and that's the distinction that I think we're developing together with the Hong Kong Museum of Art and the Heritage Museum. We have an international perspective. We look at the world also from a Hong Kong perspective, but it will be totally rooted in Hong Kong. And of course, but it's not only, and that was outlined already in the Museum Advisory Group's paper in 2006. It's not only a museum about Hong Kong, because we have two museums, major museums, that do that. But definitely, and everyone I think who's seen what we've done, read about what we're doing, read our books and so forth, is clear, I think, are convinced that this is really rooted in Hong Kong. So I totally agree with your point there. In terms of documentary material, actually the international or the Interim Acquisition Committee, in the discussion about the roadmap for the moving image material, one thing that was brought up was exactly documentary material, documentary films. One of the members on the committee is Nansen Shi, who's well known to us all, I think, and she really encouraged also the inclusion of important documentary material and documentary films into the moving image scenario. So it's not only about movies or just about, it's really a wide area, and we should look at the whole wide area, while of course remembering that the quality of the work, the height of the work is there. We're not a cultural, what shall I say, a general cultural history museum. We are after all visual culture museum.
Mr. Lee， 姚思榮。
都想問下文件嘅第11段嘅，就係講因為立法會嗰個財務委員會嗰個審批未能夠依期咁處理啦，所以咧 M+ 嗰個完工嘅日期咧會推遲半年到嚇。咁講真，而家都唔知幾時會批出嚟。咁我唔知道佢哋嗰邊咧會唔會考慮，即係有冇一個估計啊？每遲一個月撥款嘅話咧，嗰個開支會增加幾多？咁如果增加呢筆費用咧，佢哋點樣去安排呢筆預算咧？咁呢個第一個問題。第二個就係有關拓展呢個觀眾群嘅問題。咁我哋睇到咧，而家 M+ 已經係開始有啲流動嘅展覽平台喺唔同嘅地方展覽啦，亦參加唔同嘅一啲海外嘅展覽都有嘅。咁我想問下就係話，咁耐咧，一共有幾多嘅觀眾係參加呢啲咁嘅活動？其中咧本地觀眾同埋海外嘅觀眾嘅比例係幾多？咁根據而家攞到嘅數字咧，未來M+ 本身佢哋對海外觀眾嗰方面有咩嘢考慮同埋推廣計劃咧？咁樣兩個問題。
OK， 邊位答？
And I'll take the first one. Clearly, we are concerned in regard to the delay issues, the issues of delays in consideration by the public Infrastructure Committee is incredibly important, not just to M+, but to all of the other parts of this project. And clearly we are anxious that those decisions are expedited as soon as is possible. At this point, we cannot be definitive. As you said, we don't know when, as you don't know, when those decisions are going to be made. But clearly what we're trying to be is as transparent as possible in terms of the work. There are certain pieces of the work that we are able to continue forward on once the designs are complete. We have real concerns about any delays in terms of cost escalation in Hong Kong, and the fact the longer these projects go, the more expensive they're likely to be. In regard to the specifics around M+, if we can resolve the outstanding issue in regard to public infrastructure, then we're reasonably secure in the idea that we will be able to ensure OP by sometime early to mid-18. And then, that's going to be something we'll be spending an intense amount of time looking at over the course of the summer. I'll ask Dr. Nitford to just respond on the overseas programs and the broader activity.
Okay, Mr.
Now it's on. In terms of audiences, I don't have the total figure, but we can say that inflation attracted a bit over 150,000 visitors. The architecture exhibition about 20,000. Other exhibitions are around 10 to 15, 20,000 visitors. And of course, then we have the Neon Science project, which attracted a couple of 100,000 unique visits, actually 300,000, I think it was roughly, unique visits to the site, and a lot of also viewing of YouTube film of making neon signs, and more than 4,000 individuals submitted images of neon signs, their favorite neon signs in Hong Kong. So, I mean, if you summarize all these people, those who went physically there, we are in the figures over 200,000. And if we add, of course, a digital presence, it's more. In terms of background, most of them are clearly who go to the exhibitions. I mean, we have an overwhelming presence of Hong Kong people, simply. At the same time, I think it's important to underline that M+ status and standing internationally is extraordinary. And we have lots of requests for visits who wants to come and visit the museum because they believe that we're fully operational and up and running because of the reporting on what we're doing in the international media. And we have to disappoint people and say, sorry, you can come to our office, but there is no museum to look at yet. And we don't happen to have a project up and running at the present.
Okay.
Thank you.
副主席。
主席啊，唔好意思啊，即係或者第一部分嘅數字，希望係俾我哋，即係話你延遲1個月會增加幾多費用呢啲，我哋要知道。
Very happy to provide the statistics today. Yeah.
副主席。
係多謝主席。咁我諗咧，我哋應該為呢個 M+ 咧係受到世界各地嘅收藏家同埋咧視覺藝術家嘅重視咧係感到高興啦。因為呢個亦都係我哋喺要建構呢一個西九文化藝術區，希望達到嘅目的，就係再將香港咧擠翻喺國際嘅文化藝術嘅版圖上面，成為另一個亮點。咁似乎而家咧，我哋係向緊呢個目標進發緊啊。咁啊，我想問一問咧，就係喺嗰個培養本地嘅視覺藝術家嗰方面咧。究竟喺呢個 M+ 嗰個策展嘅策略啊，同埋咧嗰個安排咧，有啲乜嘢部署咧？因為我都係好希望香港有好多視覺藝術家咧，將來可以靠呢個平台咧，係晉身國際嘅舞台咧，亦都係可以將佢哋嘅嗰個視覺藝術咧，係同世界各地嘅人分享嘅。咁所以我第一個問題係先問一問咧，就係對於培養本地嘅視覺藝術家有乜嘢嘅具體嘅安排？第二個問題呢，就係我想問下呢個成立一間全資附屬公司嚟到進行 M+ 運作呢，係唔係西九管理局將來都會用一樣嘅模式套用於其他嘅展館場館嗰度呢？ 呢個係唔係就係體現主席都知我一直都講嘅藝術責任制嘅其中一個手段呢個我想知道係咪適用於其他嘅場館？多謝。
好，Mr. Lynch。
Mr. Chairman, I'll take the second question. It doesn't presuppose that we will have independent governance for each venue, and clearly that's an issue that we will be considering. But the important issue for M+, and that's why this decision has been discussed for many years, is that the sense of independence, curatorial independence, the ability to be able to raise funds to contribute to the collection in addition to the support from government will be clearly much more advantaged by the subsidiary model. Clearly having a board that is focused on M+ rather than on all of the other issues, but with a direct relationship to West Kowloon will be, I think, an important step in the evolution. It will put M+ on a similar basis with other major contemporary art museums around the world, and we see that as a very important step forward. In regard to the other venues, we're looking at both the timing issues as to when venues are going to be completed, and then what are the best governance and managerial models for taking it forward. But the only one that is immediately relevant to us alongside M+ is the ZSHU model, which the Performing Arts Committee and the board will be considering over the coming months. And I might ask Lars to just comment on your first point.
我就想跟呢個答案呢，就係邊位而家係會諗住做呢一個 M+ 呢個全資附屬公司嘅董事局嘅主席嘅
？I think that their decisions made by the board and the government. The government appoints the members of the West Kowloon board, and clearly we don't have any say in those decisions.
好，咁關於嗰個培養本土藝術家嗰度，Mr. Dr. Lee。
Well, it's not directly the task of a museum, of course, to sort of educate artists. That is done by universities and the art schools, naturally. I think the role that a museum plays is already when you are in education, you offer the students food for thought, things to look at. They get to know other artists and other developments and other movements. So that's the basis for it, to stimulate them and inspire them and so forth. The next step is, of course, and I think that's more what you're thinking of is, of course, to what extent will we be a platform for Hong Kong artists? Of course, we will not be a platform for all Hong Kong artists. That is impossible, and I don't think that's the task for us. But we will clearly be a platform for Hong Kong artists, just as any national museum and any other part of the world would be a platform for its artists, but also for bringing artists from other parts of the world to Hong Kong for inspiration and excitement for the wider public and so forth. So I think that M+ could be a place where, that you will be aiming at as an artist. It doesn't mean that you have to be old and have worked for 30, 40 years before you get a chance. But it's for the top talents, of course, of Hong Kong. And it's a great chance to make Hong Kong artists known to the wider public. We have seen from last year in Venice that if it's done right and if it's done with sort of the right backing, a Hong Kong artist who is relatively unknown beforehand can become an international name by just having the right backing and the right platform. And that's what we hope to provide by M+.
OK， 多謝你。陳婉嫻，陳婉嫻到你。
OK， 唔該，我聽唔到，唔好意思。主席，其實我都係跟進翻呢個問題嘅。嗱，我對於即係要成立一個全資嘅附屬嘅管理。咁咧，我自己同你西九啲朋友都問呢個問題，我點解做一個咁嘅全資啊？如果按照剛才解釋就話，我為咗更靈活同國際好多嘅接觸，咁我覺得如果咁講法，係咪我哋而家現有嘅架構係唔足夠呢點呢？如果假如你話用呢啲理由嚟講咧，咁你將來可唔可以成立一啲戲曲中心公司咧、音樂中心公司咧？即係我覺得係咪各都有個平台咧？咁當時最後個董事局管唔管到佢哋咧？佢哋可能成為一個獨立王國咧？呢個我擔心主席。即係我覺得我
認同係需要同國際好多方面有好多聯繫啊、接軌啊等等，包括人才。但咁唔係一個理由要成立一個咁嘅全資獨立公司。我好擔心到時成為一個獨立王國點算呢？成個政府即係民政嗰度點去處理問題呢？我都想問下，即係呢個部分應該由翻民政嘅官員答我。即係你當佢哋提咗建議，你點睇咧？唔該晒，主席。
好啊，民政局答一答，你點樣將來點樣去控制同埋監管呢啲公司？
多謝主席。我哋都係贊同呢個建議嘅，因為咧，我哋覺得都係同國際嘅博物館去接軌啦。另外咧，雖然 M+ 將來會係一個全資嘅附屬公司啦，但係其實佢嘅人事啦、佢嘅財政計劃啦、佢嘅業務計劃咧，仍然係需要得到西九嘅管理局去批准嘅，亦都係佢其他嘅政策，譬如係人事財政啊、IT 啊、其他嘅政策咧，都係要跟翻西九管理局所定下嘅政策嘅。咁所以我覺得咧，個管理局西九管理局將來仍然係會有足夠嘅監管嘅。
喂，而家佢唔係全資㗎啦咩？而家西九管理局都全資㗎啦，全部都係獨立㗎啦。咁你點解全資獨立之下又全資獨立嘅咧？喂，你咁樣一路咁樣 square root 上去唔掂㗎喎。咁佢嗰個全資公司係咪淨係受西九管理局監管，就唔需要將來使幾多錢做乜嘢，唔需要嚟立法會咧？因為係咁樣去架空立法會咧。
主席，好似係我問啊，你記得？
係啊，我即係補充你個問題。
你俾啲時間
你答清楚俾阿陳婉嫻啦。
OK。
你覺得呢個好咩？即係而家你覺得而家唔好。
你答我哋先得㗎啊 ，OK。
得唔得到啊？得唔得啊
？Who do you want to answer?
Who do?
The question was
我都
addressed
仍
to
然希望
HMB.
政府。
佢問政府，佢問政府，而家請政府答。
呢個權係政府㗎嘛？唔該。
係啊，你應該批唔批准佢？你要講㗎嘛。
係，我哋唔反對嗰個全資附屬公司
咁你要答到啊
全資附屬公司
陳議員講將來點樣去監管，會唔會成為獨立王國？會唔會架空咗立法會？
佢其實唔會嘅，因為咧將來 M+ 佢嗰個財政預算咧，仍然係需要係得到西九管理局嘅批核嘅，而係整體嚟講咧。
如果既然假如咁政府咁答咧，就何須有個全資獨立咧？即係你都係 control 住佢哋嘅，佢只不過一班藝術家，你 control 住講五指山鼠咧，冇嚟冇去佢，咁有乜意思？我唔係好明喎。
而家已經係全資㗎啦，而家已經係獨立㗎啦。
即係我覺得奇怪啊！嗱，我尊重外行唔能夠管內行嘅嘢，我尊重呢點嘅。但問題就話你而家講係一個好矛盾。我跟住問你，咁你其他啲係咪拖做啲音樂中心公司啊、戲曲中心公司係咁全部都咁樣啊？咁將來如果有事咧，就主席佢就嗱，唔係我呢屆下一屆或者再下一屆就我唔關我事。當時上屆議會同意咗我做一個獨立公司，佢全部理晒。咁到時我理唔到毛孟靜，咁先精彩喎。你明我意思嘛？
I think I answered that question already. The issue is M+ is a particular instance. I think you asked us a question at our last meeting about why a respected Hong Kong philanthropist had given $100 million to the Asia Society and the answer was because he perceived it to be an independent institution. Clearly the fundraising capacity of M+ is a specific issue in being able to build the collection and to build the philanthropic support in addition to the support that they get through the business planning process. But as I have said, we are not looking at the individual venues, individual theatres or individual parts of the site having their own governance arrangements.
And
it is absolutely clear from the existing structure and the existing ordinance that the West Kowloon Cultural Authority is there to be able to deal with those issues in regard to the other venues. There is no question of, in this situation, of people being able to operate independently. I don't know whether, Mr. Chairman, whether anyone wants to listen to our answers today.
我知㗎。我知㗎，因為咧我之前同過係
陳議員都夠鐘啦，好嘛？
不過你用咗我啲時間，我先用翻少少啫。
我已經俾多咗你好多啦。
OK， 不過我想仍然提嗱，我仍然提翻少少就話，我覺得政府如果你放權俾咗佢哋咧，我唔反對，但係俾佢做個全資咧，我好擔心到時可以做個平台拍賣啲古物古蹟都得喎。主席唔該。
OK， 明白。我話呢個咧咁嘅情況底下咧，我諗咧。 你頭先一開始答
Mr. Chairman,
副
we
主
must
席，
clarify it is not
我冇叫你講
possible
啊
for any of the organisations.
Mr. Lynch stop， 等我叫你講，你先講。頭先咧，副主席就係講呢個問題，陳議員講一個問題。咁你可唔可以做一份文件？政府做一份文件翻嚟話俾我聽，有咩機構？你已經話咗唔係所有機構都係用呢個方法嘅。咁你講各種嘅方法有咩好處唔好處？點解 M+ 要用呢個方法？佢有咩特色？點解要用呢個方法？係同其他唔同。我知道你嗰個即係
M+
唔係你做份文件答我哋得㗎啦，而家唔需要答嘛。多謝下一位，何秀蘭。
係啊，主席，我第一我要多謝管理局揾到咁多捐贈啦，即係包括係一啲藝術收藏品同埋金錢上嘅捐贈，咁呢個係即係要多謝大家係做得好好。第二呢，就係嗰個M+ 嘅內部同埋外部。嗱，外部嗰個設計呢，咁我哋見過啦。但係我自己呢，就覺得一個博物館呢，嗰個內部係即係尤其是展覽嗰部分呢，係比外邊嗰個外觀係更加緊要嘅，因為裏邊要有彈性啦，令到即係你做不同嘅展覽嘅時候係可以即係適合到嗰某個展覽啦。咁而參觀嘅人呢，亦都係佢由踏入博物館嗰刻開始，佢點樣行？你嗰條路點樣設計，令到佢成個睇展覽嘅經驗係有一個互動喺度呢？咁呢個係好重要嘅。咁所以我希望就可以盡快俾我哋睇到內部嘅設計，就唔係淨係外觀添啦。咁第三呢，就係跟進黃碧雲議員頭先講嗰個話即係要有返一個老香港嘅影像擺喺度，等參觀嘅市民呢係可以睇埋一啲本土嘅文化。咁就我頭先聽到就話即係施南生都可以幫手啦，即係揾一啲紀錄片。但係其實如果有施南生幫手呢，就應該揾佢即係睇翻香港嘅舊電影，因為裏邊呢係有不少嘅片段呢都係好多香港嘅街景。咁就嗰啲其實都係好珍貴，但係可能就要同電影資料館嗰度大家合作，即係做一啲剪輯。咁我希望M+ 嘅團隊係可以幫手做到呢個。到最後呢，都真係要問翻個管治架構，因為喺第15段嗰度呢，咁佢嗰個起始呢，就係話為咗消除同博物館有業務來往人士眼中法律上不明確之處。咁我就好想問，究竟呢啲業務往來人士究竟係乜嘢人呢？同埋佢哋眼中嘅法律不明確之處係乜嘢不明確呢？因為我哋要知道咗個原因，然後先知道即係呢個解決方法係咪即係最有效啊嘛？咁所以就主席，我就想俾我剩翻1分鐘嘅時間，就俾Mr. Michael Lynch 去講佢頭先想解釋嘅嘢咯。
好啊 ，Mr. Lynch。
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess the issue of and the idea of the importance of being able for the museum to be able to run a program, to be able to pick up and take exhibitions to other museums, for other museums to bring exhibitions to this museum is an important part of the business of contemporary art museums. The importance of independence of both curatorial direction is an important part of it. But I think as important in terms of the proposed governance structure is the idea that the outside world, the people who want to support the museum in either donating works to the museum, donating money to the museum, that they want to see that it is a museum and that it operates on the same basis that other museums operate around the world. And it's not a private museum, it's a not-for-profit institution. It clearly needs, and it is the only visual arts organisation within West Kowloon. So the justification for it having a different governance structure than the 15 theatres in West Kowloon and a range of the other facilities has, I think, been strongly argued over the last 7 or 8 years. Pre the establishment of West Kowloon, these issues have been canvassed, they've come out of the Hong Kong visual arts community, and I think there is a strong, in principle, support for establishing this museum on a different basis to the existing not-for-profit government institutions in Hong Kong. And we see significant benefits from that structural situation while recognising that there is still a very close relationship between M+ and the rest of the West Kowloon Board, the West Kowloon organisation, and is a critical part of the West Kowloon site.
Okay, thank you. 毛孟靜。
多謝主席。Mr. Lynch, you have to understand our concern about M+ being an independent institution. Is it going to become...
Could I clarify? I don't actually clearly understand, bearing in mind the issues that we have continually discussed. I would be glad to get...
Mr. Lynch， 你讓嗰啲議員問晒問題，你先答啦。你兩個喺度對話嘅時候，我都唔知你哋做緊乜嘢，好嘛？請你盡快講講。
Right. The fact that it just might become a little empire of its own. What about funding applications in the future? As the chairman was asking earlier, would it need to go through LegCo at all? You would only come under the authority, right? So we're not too sure about the entire setup. That's the problem. I'll give you plenty of time to reply to this question. And my number 2 question is, looking at that particular slide, view from M+ view from the park. It doesn't look very impressive, I have to say. Well, I'm not an artist in any way, but then from a layman viewpoint, I was actually looking forward to some sort of landmark. And I was particularly almost baffled by the design that it actually sits right in front of a building behind. Is that what it's about? I thought that's an architectural crime. Almost. What's that about? Could you tell us more? 2 questions, thanks.
To your second question, no, we sit on a 40-hectare site in front of some of the less attractive and less impressive architectural offerings in Hong Kong, and no, that's the reality of life. No, I don't think we can take responsibility for what's been built around the rest of the West Kowloon site. I disagree with you in principle, and we've clearly argued the merits. No, we've gone through competitions. We've had the best architects in the world contribute their designs.
主席啊，即係而家嗰個設計事實係好似一個箱咁樣咯，就真係唔係特別啊，令我覺得啊。
Mr. Lynch， 你俾佢講完先，我叫你答你先答啦。而家係開緊會。
I thought you.
Okay.
你問完未 ？Okay, Mr. Lynch, your terms. Can you?
No, I think we are, and clearly the response from Hong Kong, from the rest of the world, to the winning design and the proposal as the design has developed is very positive. Clearly, I guess plenty of people, I know members of the committee have voiced their views about that. We will robustly engage with you on why this decision was made. So on that part of it, I guess we just have to agree to differ with the committee. In regard to independent, there is the idea of the ongoing locus of this committee, whether it be on M+ or on any other of the parts of the West Kowloon project, is very clear. We would like this committee to assist us in being able to move forward some of the things that particularly at the moment endanger the progress on the project. But it doesn't matter what the appropriate governance arrangements that are decided for M+ and for the rest of the site, it will still be under the scrutiny of the LegCo. And if this committee continues, we assume of this committee. And in terms of the funding proposals and the funding base, some of the money will come from the West Kowloon Authority in the formal process of submitting a business plan and being approved by the West Kowloon Board, which is then comes to the LegCo. Clearly, what we are also trying to do is to diversify the funding base to be able to encourage collections, to be able to encourage philanthropy and other support, which ensures that the citizens of Hong Kong are paying less for the future of the project, and we are maximising the possibilities of other support.
好多謝你嚇，咁啊最後我就有啲問題，即係我想即係代表咧政府好西九好咧，即係你哋嘅文件已經俾咗我哋睇㗎啦，唔需要再讀多次，用咗25分鐘去讀咧，其實都解決唔到即係委員對你嘅問題。但係你對呢個西九呢個設計咧，你係用3張圖就咁簡單講，所以我都同意啊毛孟靜嗰個睇法。你根本我就去睇過你哋嘅展覽。但係你都解釋唔到點解你由嗰5個會揀依個？依個佢有咩特色？佢係嗰個內涵係講乜嘢？佢係代表啲咩嘢？即係當香港市民又好，外地人嘅嚟又好，喂，呢個係乜嘢嚟㗎？即係你解釋唔到依個佢係個象徵啲乜嘢，或者佢想表達啲咩嘢？只不過見到一個好大嘅巨型嘅建築物。打橫好似屏風樓咁樣，或者大電視機，即係之前講或者倒轉嘅3號風球嗰個嘥，咁變咗即係大家都覺得錢係用得好多。之前你話47億，而家變咗50幾億，即係你呢個咁用咗咁多錢，即係差唔多每尺咧超過5萬蚊嘅呢個建築費。咁你用咁多錢去起呢個咁大嘅白象，但係你又講唔到內涵，即係一個冇靈魂嘅白象。咁所以我覺得真係好失望。今次你根本喺度解釋就唔得。第二咧，喺你個軟件嗰方面咧，你個構藏政策你都未曾話俾我哋聽。喂，究竟你個定位點咧？你呢個 M+ 嘅定位係乜嘢？你想係喺世界上定啲咩位？喺亞洲上定咩位？香港你點樣定位？你都定唔到個位。咁你如果定到個位，你先有個構藏方向。你點樣去達到呢個構藏方向，用咩方法？但係你冇，你只今次你又有解釋到啦，你就話留翻俾成立嗰個獨立公司，全資嗰個公司去諗咯咁樣。喂，咁唔得㗎喎，好似頭先有啲委員咧就話，喂，你而家應該有呢個方向㗎嘛，係嘛？如果你而家都冇方向嘅，咁你而家做乜嘢咧？將來再揾人去做，咁你點解而家要買咁多嘢咧？買呢個嘢，呢啲嘢係咪？係滿足，或者你接收人哋嘅贈品嘅時候，你係咪滿足你呢個方向咧？你如果冇喎，冇方向，即係將啲有嘢你去買，靚嘢又買，你認為靚啦，我哋都未必認為靚。但係有人送你又收，其實係一個好似打亂仗咁亂糟糟咁樣。咁你覺得你點樣去詳細去解釋呢個政策？咁最後一點咧，就好多同事咧都係好多委員都提過咧，你成立一個全資公司咧，有冇咁嘅必要？點解要做喺 M+ 要咁做，喺其他嘅場館唔係咁做，好唔好咧？喺呢3個問題咧，你都係希望你能夠咧喺文字上詳細向我哋解釋，將來嘅討論，好嘛？多謝。Okay, Mr. Lynch.
Well, in regard to your third part of your question, as I've said repeatedly today, we have not, the nature of a major museum on which we spend $5 billion has different requirements than the individual theatres that we're building on the other parts of the site. That's part of the justification in terms of what we're talking about with the governance model. Clearly, I don't entirely understand your comments in regard to the collection. There is an acquisition policy which is publicly available. We have provided information on all of the acquisitions that we've made, both to this committee and online and in various other forms and responses. And that's, we understand the ongoing need to explain what's in the collection and how the collection's done. Any donation to the collection goes through the same acquisition policy as though we were buying it. They clearly have to comply with the policy of the acquisition policy of the museum. And if someone wanted to donate the history of
如果你唔明白咧，我會 black and white 咁樣寫俾你。我就覺得你嗰個
I do understand your question, Mr. Chairman. I just don't think you're allowing me an opportunity to answer your question. And in regard to your first question, I think the issue, the reality of life is that more than a year ago the government announced the winner of the competition for M+, announced the budget. We are in line with the budget. We are in line with the design process. And from that point of view,
我會在文字上講清楚問啲咩問題，好嗎？無謂嘥時間，因為我哋仲有一 part 咧都好重要。我哋進入第2 part 咧就係關於個公園最新嘅發展同埋設計、用途同埋管理。 咁我哋希望用50分鐘嘅時間去講。咁邊位會介紹一下嚇？
I will, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, the park is probably the most anticipated facility of the West Kowloon Cultural District. You are well aware, as members of the committee, of the decisions that were made last year when some of the changes were outlined by the chairman in June last year. We clearly see the park as not only a major green space in the heart of the city, but a very important part of what we're trying to do to inspire, promote and encourage cultural pursuits for all. And we've strongly reiterated the issue of the park, as all of West Kowloon will be a place for everyone. As we set out in our discussion paper, we've been moving very quickly on a number of fronts. In February this year, we appointed the park design team, and that park design team is comprised of Dennis Lau and Ung Chun Man architects, and ACLA from Hong Kong, and Westgate from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, one of the world's leading park designers. And today we have Martin Biwenga from Westgate and Chung Kwong Wing from Dennis Law to be able to take you through where that design now is, and in terms of the key issues that have been raised by members of the committee over, I think I would say, over the last 2 years. On park use and management, as we mentioned to members at the June meeting, we have just completed the engagement exercise led by the consultation panel to collect public views on how the park should operate. That exercise is now completed, and we had shared with members some of the preliminary findings. We also, beginning now as we move towards the resolution of the park, we now are talking about how the park is going to be managed and the general framework of the park bylaws. And we're very clear, interested in hearing the views of members once we've been able to outline that proposal today. I guess that's my starting point. I'd now like to introduce Martin Biwenga from Westgate to take us through a quick run-through of what is a quite complex development. So I hope the committee will give us the opportunity to be able to take you through the key issues.
好啊，多歡迎你兩位出席啊！咁請你用15分鐘嘅時間介紹你哋嘅 slide。
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is. We wait for the speaker.
我哋聽到㗎啦。
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Martin Biwenga, Director of Westgate Landscape Architects. We are designing and building parks around the world in New York, Madrid, Toronto, and now in Hong Kong, which is a very exciting opportunity for us. We work with a very strong local team for a good implementation of the design. And the park, today we would like to share with you the concept design for the park. In our view, the park will be a tranquil and sublime counterpoint to the intensity of Hong Kong City, a place where residents can go to relax and enjoy the green space and the waterfront. We think the park will be a magnet for people, for families, but also for visitors with the new Kowloon station. And interestingly, the park has a second identity, which is an active identity, because it can accommodate events, festivals, performances, but also food and art. Because the park is designed, of course, as being a part of the cultural district of Hong Kong. On the screen, you can see the plan of the concept design. with clearly the entrance to the West Kowloon crossing. And also, of course, on the right side here, the M+ Museum, the Artist Square, and the start of the avenue of the West Kowloon Cultural District. In the park, integrated in the design, are the two ventilation buildings that at the moment, of course, since the site is empty, are very prominent on the site, the ventilation building for the highway tunnel and the MRT. The backbone of the park is a pedestrian pathway that is basically an extension of the avenue from the future district of cultural district of West Kowloon, which continues across the Artist Square into the park, let's say descending down into the park, and being the major artery of the park for pedestrians, and let's say as an anchor point for cultural activities in the park. This is an impression we made from the cultural boulevard, an impression from M+ descending down into the park, giving visitors beautiful vistas through the park on the waterfront of Hong Kong, on the other side of Victoria Harbour. The park itself is an interesting hybrid of green space, of a green leisure space for local residents and for Hong Kong residents, combined with performance spaces, performance venues, exhibition spaces. Here on the top left, you see the design for the art pavilion, which is located in the park, but also cafes and small restaurants in the park to make it a comfortable visit for the people. Next to the Cultural Boulevard, the second, of course, main attraction of the park is the accessibility to the waterfront. The park has a 1.2 kilometer public waterfront, a promenade that provides 270 degrees views to Victoria Harbour and Hong Kong Island and to the west. Very spectacular. This is something that is given to the site, and we are using it in the design. Especially the southern part of the waterfront promenade is widened to create a larger space to allow large groups of people to enjoy the beautiful view on Hong Kong Island. These are some, let's say, initial renderings from this space on the waterfront. It's a mix between a square and a lawn, providing access to the waterfront. And what is very important in design and important to understand is that since the park will be a mix of event spaces and park spaces, we think it's very important that if there's an event in the park, people can still use the rest of the park for leisure. So the park will not be shut down if there's an event. You can still use the park. And for that reason, we introduced, especially on the southern edge, an elevated park edge. You can see that here in the section. So if there is an event on the waterfront, the users of the park can still enjoy the views over over Victoria Harbour. We think that's a very important element of the park design. This is an impression of that waterfront space with a wide pedestrian boulevard, a lawn with a cycle track running through it, and the edge, the double edge, where people can enjoy the waterfront in the shadow of the edge, but also on the elevated level here, which is also a promenade with the park on top. the space between the Cultural Boulevard and the waterfront is a proper park that can accommodate cultural events and art events as an extension, as a natural extension of the West Kowloon Cultural District. We've accommodated different spaces in the park for small and larger events. One of the main areas for large events will be the big lawn, the light green space, which is an open space in the park that can accommodate more than 10,000 visitors for large-scale outdoor events. Of course, there is this space on the waterfront for events that use the magnificent views. In the heart of the park is a more intimate park area, of which we think that is a very interesting area for families and for local visitors. And of course, there is an area in the park which is adjacent to the M+ museum. It's a lawn that is sloping down gently sloping down into the park. We've tested the activities that have been organized by West Kowloon Cultural District in the past on the park design, and we are comfortable that these activities can take place in the future park. Some of the activities are large, attract a lot of people. Some activities are smaller, and the park can accommodate both type of cultural activities. In this rather technical plan, you can see the different exhibition spaces, the big lawn, the smaller lawn for more intimate events and intimate activities, the waterfront plaza event space, and the lawn related next to M+. And of course, in the northern part of the park, the temporary event space, which is already in place and is already used intensively. From the Cultural Boulevard, we've created different connections through the park, pedestrian connections to the waterfront. The connections are not only physical connections, but also, let's say, guide the views from the visitors to the waterfront. Here's an overview of the park with in the heart of the park, the Black Box Theatre, with the cafes around it and the art pavilion adjacent to it. The art pavilion will be one of the first initiatives in the park. And scattered throughout the park are amenities like kiosks, cafes and dining places, and of course toilets, public toilets throughout the park to make it a comfortable visit. This is a view from the big lawn where we, let's say, simulated a festival. The festival is an outdoor stage that is related to the Black Box Theatre, so it can utilize the facilities of the Black Box Theatre. And the lawn is a place where people can sit on the grass but also enjoy the shadow of the surrounding tree lines. And the lawn basically borrows the view from M+ here in the back. And of course the West Kowloon Cultural District will develop its skyline in the back of this view. The small lawn is a much more intimate space with an intimate character, very much suitable for small exhibitions and for families to enjoy the park in a shaded condition. Of course, what is not part of the design but is a given from the site is that it is unprecedented in its spectacular view, and the design completely celebrates these views on the skyline. We have 270-degree views over the harbor, and especially the waterfront event space, let's say, celebrates the view on Victoria Harbor and Hong Kong Island. We've tested this space for different events, and it's a very flexible space that can accommodate different events. This is an important image because, of course, the M+ Museum is facing onto the park, and this is a view from the botanical garden in the park, where you see the lawn and the M+ Museum in the back. We think that, let's say, the art component of the park can be quite important in curating pieces for the park, public art displayed in the park. And we've pointed out different places where we think permanent or temporary art installations can be accommodated in the park and surprise and welcome the visitors to the park. Very important element of the park, and that has already been initiated by West Kowloon Cultural District, is a bicycle program. Along the waterfront, we've accommodated a bicycle route, a network that where visitors can cycle along the waterfront, and of course this route anticipates on future connections to the city of Kowloon. The botanical aspect of the park has two main ingredients. We think, and especially if you compare the design with the current situation where it's very empty and flat, it's very important to provide shading for the visitors because Hong Kong has a hot climate. So a large part of the trees that will be planted have a function of providing shadow, and the rest of the trees are very much there to experience the different seasons, so the autumn and the spring. So these are very much flowering trees, as you can see here on the slides. Along the main footpath in the park, we will have the trees to provide the shadow for the visitors, and we combine that with small pavilions, shading structures, as resting points along the route, and to give shadow and protect from rain. At the moment, since the site is a landfill, it's very flat, and what we've done is introduce topography on the site to create spectacular views over Victoria Harbour, to connect the park with the surrounding areas of M+, and also to manage rainwater in a sustainable and ecological way in the park. So, as a conclusion, we think that the concept design for the park is an interesting hybrid between a local park and that can accommodate events in the cultural district of West Kowloon. Thank you very much.
好，多謝你嚇。冇補充啊？如果冇補充，我哋就委員提問嘅時間。你排咗隊有范國威副主席，即係委全。咁我每人4分鐘連問連答。請范國威。
好，多謝主席。我想有幾個問題問嘅，如果問唔晒，我留第二輪啦。第一個問題咧就係喺
未必有第二輪啊，盡量。
咩話？
未必有第二輪，盡量問精簡。
第一個問題咧就我想問喺成個公園，因為都係即係其中一個好重要嘅部分啦。我睇文件，我唔知有冇睇漏咧，就喺呢一個嘅西北邊嗰度，仲有一大塊，即係都係應該係有草皮地，亦都係公園嘅一部分。係咪因為工程上面嘅需要、office 嘅需要，又或者有一度話咩 plan leisure， 即係逐時嘅需要，所以唔係同步地係去做規劃？呢個第一個嘅問題啦。如果唔係話咧，應該同步去做嘅話咧，嗰度佔地一啲都唔少嘅咁樣。第二個問題咧就係我知道咧就話希望喺整個公園裏邊咧，將綠化嘅範圍就最擴大嘅，即係好 maximize 呢個即係綠化嘅地方。咁裏邊咧有2個建築物就冇得搬走，亦都唔係公園原有嘅，即係呢個西隧嘅通風大樓啦，同埋呢個港鐵嘅通風大樓。記住係港鐵啊，唔係地鐵。07年之後冇咗地鐵㗎啦，港鐵通風大樓呢2個我見圖片嗰度咧，無論你個 PowerPoint 嘅第15頁咧，好似佢佔地嘅地方比而家真實嘅情況，即係嗰啲石屎紅毛泥嘅地嘅 嘅位置仲比而家係多咗，係咪已經係減到最少呢？仲可唔可以喺令到佢可以整合同個範圍可以即係更加多嘅綠化，例如係垂直綠化，又或者根本佢已經本身已經係好未來主義、好 futuristic 嘅，好似包house咁樣，你已經用啲好鮮黃啊、鮮藍嗰顏色，係令到佢都可以即係作為一個嘅建築設計嘅一部分咁樣。我係想問，即係如何地去整合嘅啫。第三咧，建築公司West 8係咪啊？West 8嗰度咧就有好多其他出名嘅國際設計，喺設計上面、特色上邊，即係你哋有提到 New York 嘅 Governor Island Park 啊、Miami 嘅 Lincoln Park， 又或者係韓國首爾嘅龍山公園啊，喺嗰個特色上邊有冇即係可唔可以俾多少少資料？我哋有邊啲地方係相類似，有邊啲地方係我哋呢個嘅西九公園嘅特色係好 unique 嘅、好獨特嘅咁樣啦。係最後一個問題咧，就係有一個01號文件，即係有好多嘅團體同埋市民俾嘅，就係個主題就話叫當代方向，讓公眾或者讓公民真正擁有西九公園。我想問佢哋俾咗呢啲意見裏邊，其實提好多即係公民係去參與啊，如何地影響西九管理局將會喺2015年年初交嚟我哋立法會有關嗰個附例嘅草稿。即係喺管理上面，你哋聽咗呢啲意見，佢哋提咗好多意見嘅，有啲我唔知道點樣具體地係去執行嘅添，如何地令到公園嘅限制係即係施加得最少，即係作為一個嘅大原則。有邊啲意見你哋認為係可以吸納得到？即係佢哋有提到，即係公園附近有啲範圍用嚟釣魚嘅添，咁樣係。咁呢啲係咪都係你哋會參考嘅咧？咁樣係。主席4個意見，4個問題。
Okay, Mr. Lim.
Could I just deal with the first one, Mr. Fan? The site to the north of the park is the present temporary nursery, which will become a temporary park over the course of the coming year. We want to open that up for ongoing use. It is also the site for the major performance venue. And from that point of view, we don't know the timetable or when that's likely to be resolved. And then those two buildings that one of them is the project site office for the whole of West Kowloon, where we have half of our staff working on that in that building next to the tunnel, and then the rest of that site is existing ongoing use that will keep operating. Ultimately, once those decisions are resolved, once the rest of the park is done, we'd be then looking at extending the park into that extra area. I might just ask Martin to make a quick comment on the issues you've raised about greening. We would very much prefer not to have the two existing structures there, but we have very little control over them. It is very difficult to even disguise them. We've tried to think of painting them, greening them, doing all sorts of things, but Martin may have a specific response to your question.
Yeah, the two buildings are, let's say, very prominent in the current site. Also, their architecture is very explicit, and of course, like you mentioned, the area around them, it's not only the buildings, but they also have service yards and EVA access. And we're talking to the two owners to minimize the impact of especially of the service yards. And let's say our approach to integrating these two buildings in the park is by hiding them as much as possible from the visitors by providing a green color around them with trees and planting. So especially when you're in the park, you will hardly notice the two buildings. Of course, if you are on the Hong Kong side and you look towards the park, because the buildings are so tall, you cannot miss them. When I compare the park to other designs, I think one of the similarities is that, and that's a general principle of landscape architecture, you try to create and to simulate nature by focusing, by guiding vistas, by creating distances.
我諗時間夠啦，我一陣間會俾時間你再答，因為我都有相同嘅問題。下一位，副主席。
多謝主席。首先呢，我諗要感謝Mr. Martin by Wagner 啦，同埋 West 8咧， 我諗初步咁樣我睇你嘅介紹咧，就呢一個設計咧，的確係有好多起碼我去過嘅比較靚嘅世界各地嘅公園嘅一個影子喺度。但係我就想集中嘅問題就唔係問West 8嘅，我就想問下關於嗰個公園點樣管理嘅問題。因為呢個公園咧，無論係點樣美輪美奐咧，如果你用康文署嗰啲咁嘅公園附例嚟管咧，就肯定死梗嘅啊！咁所以咧，我就想問下啦，因為我喺文件度咧特別留意到第6段咧就有提到公園嘅定位願景使命咧，同埋咧就喺第22段開始咧就有交代到嗰個而家做緊嘅公眾意見調查嘅。我想問一問管理當局啦，即係呢一個願景同使命咧，就會進一步去討論之後去深化係嘛？因為你而家咁樣寫願景同使命咧，就都係比較簡單。咁簡單唔係一定唔好，但係我就覺得可以再豐富少少。或者我先講啦，主席就係我其實同意咧，即係你係唔應該由嗰啲附例嗰度出發嘅，你係應該先定咗個願景同使命先咧。呢個係我完全擁抱同埋支持嘅方向，因為你只有知道個願景同埋使命咧，你先至可以喺取捨之間，喺點樣去寫嗰啲管理嘅附例嘅時候咧，係有所拿捏啦，亦都知所行止。咁所以我其實同意個願景同使命係應該先定，然後咧就去先開始寫嗰啲附例嘅。但係我就想問下，究竟呢個願景同使命咧，係仲會有啲乜嘢嘅公眾嘅參與啊，或者其他持份者嘅參與，你先會定實嗰個願景同埋使命咧？咁然後就請交代一下嗰個時間表，即係幾時呢一個公眾意見調查係會有報告交到出嚟呢？同埋有咗報告之後，同寫好附例可以交嚟立法會期間嗰個操作又會包含啲乜嘢嘅元素呢？主席，
好啊，請大家答邊位答
？Well, we hope to have the report finalised by September and then to be able to bring it back here as soon as possible. Clearly, the ongoing work on vision mission has been very much part of the philosophy behind the development of the park, but we are also running those processes in parallel. And I think the important issue in regard to both address, I think I didn't address Gary Phan's question about fishing and some of the other issues. Clearly we are looking at encouraging as many uses, both cultural and leisure uses as we can. The view from the government and from ourselves has been light touch, clearly bylaws that enable us to ensure the best interests of public safety and security, recognise it's a big site. It has potentially areas of danger that we need to be able to manage. We have to be able to recognise the balance between the activities that take place that are organised by people or organised by us. But we're really looking at light touch in terms of the bylaws. And so I think it is very clear in terms of public response to date that people want to be able to do as many things as possible, to be able to do things not in an organised form, and I guess striking the balance both in terms of what we bring back to LegCo for discussion. I think it's been very clear, the view from LegCo over almost the 3 years I've been here, is that they want the park to be open to everybody. They want it to not be like necessarily other parks in Hong Kong, and clearly we're very much moving in that direction.
OK， 多謝你，謝偉銓。
多謝主席。當然啦，即係呢個文化公園係非常重要啦，因為其實成個西九嚟講咧，佢都佔地相當大。咁亦都係即係一般即係市民可以即係較容易享用嘅。咁我都好開心咧，即係喺個設計方面咧，又強調咗即係點樣藝術啊、文化同埋呢個公園嘅 呢個結合。喺呢方面咧，就即係多謝嗰啲設計團隊喺呢方面，即係用啲腦筋，即係咁樣。咁我其實同其他同事都好關注咧。其實因為有兩個，即係包括嗰個港鐵嗰個通風大樓同埋嗰個西隧通風大樓，另外亦都係西隧嘅入口。呢啲咧，即係我都希望喺個設計上咧，盡可能咧睇下佢哋可唔可以，即係盡可能有配合啦。如果唔係咧，只係即係頭先講啦，可能係一啲。即係自己做，將佢圍咗啊等等，使到嗰個視野上係即係嗰個影響減到最低。咁呢個我諗已經係最低限度啦。咁都希望即係積極啲。反而我主席，我另外都關注咧，就係設計之外咧，就係話呢個公園咧，頭先講過俾香港市民享用啊咁樣。咁喺嗰個即係使用者行人嗰個暢達性嘅問題咧，喺個設計上咧。有冇考慮？因為如果唔係淨係睇個公園咧，有冇睇嗰個暢達性咧？尤其是咧，成個西九文化個發展咧，個時間都好長嚇。咁有一段時間咧，就係可能有啲工程做緊嘅喺附近，亦都最後當然啦，就係所有工程做完啦。喺呢方面喺個設計方面咧，係有冇共一同考慮咧？主要呢個問題。唔該，主席。
兩個問題。Thanks,
Mr. Chair. Clearly, accessibility, as I've mentioned before, is one of the four principles that underpin this project. We clearly recognise the importance of 23 hectares of public space within the 40 hectares. Clearly, the basement project and being able to bring people in under the ground, away from cars, does throw up interesting issues in terms of how. Particularly the disabled and the elderly are able to get to the space, and we're looking at, we think one of the real strong parts of the West 8 DLN proposal is that it enables us to have forms of transport for people who are mobility challenged to be able to get to every part of the park. I personally cannot get to parts of the park if I rely on walking to it at the present time. Clearly, we're looking at making sure that every part of the park is available. If you're in a wheelchair, you walk with a stick, or you've got children in prams. That is a very fundamental importance of the cultural boulevard and the hard landscape relative to the soft landscape. Clearly, also drop-off points. The ability of being able to move people around the site is a really fundamental principle. And we will, that will be in the next stage of evolution of both the design and the practical moving forward on the park. We'll be providing that information to LegCo.
主席，我其實除咗個公園本身嘅設計，其實就點樣去個公園呢？尤其是咧，大家都明白，而家就要去嗰度就。都好複雜嘅，因為而家太多工程做緊。咁但係我相信公園完成之後咧，其實有段時間咧都有工程喺附近嘅。咁我希望喺個設計咧，嗰個暢達嗰個就係唔單止本身公園本身，即係你點樣去到公園嗰度咧？而家即係我自己行嗰度咧，真係好混亂嘅，講真嚇。咁當然我希望咧。隨住嗰啲工程越嚟越即係完成多咧，就會更加好啦。不過我都希望咧喺設計方面咧都考慮，即係唔單止公園本身點樣去呢個公園咧，其實都係需要注意嘅嚇。唔該，主席。
好啊，我諗你記住啦嚇。下一位陳婉霞。
多謝主席。我兩個方面嘅。一個對公園嘅設計咧，我唔咁快落定論，因為淨係睇個平面圖睇唔到嘢嘅。我就已經同咗西九咧，我唔該你做個模型，我睇清楚啲。起碼我而家初步睇個公園，你哋係好大啦，阿謝議員。以我自己認識嘅芝加哥，我喺處聽管弦樂嘅時候咧，嗰幅草地非常之大。我嗰日問佢哋，佢大1點幾公頃，亦係好細就我想講。咁但係呢個我哋先天不足，我哋本身個地方就咁多啦嚇。咁但係問題就係點樣喺個基礎上做得更加達到我哋好似你諮詢意見咁樣咧？我好希望盡快俾到我睇啲模型先得。咁睇，我覺得我唔能夠作個評價，我亦都唔係話好同唔好，即係呢個我想提出。第二個咧，我就關心有關你哋將會做個附例咧，我覺得需要嘅。亦都你將個附例，你就話會喺明年嘅年初咧話俾我哋聽，我就希望你未拍板之前咧，都嚟我哋呢度諮詢下我哋先，因為香港喺管理公園係一個好壞嘅一啲經驗就有，即係圍住晒公園。噴水池可以鎖住佢唔俾入嘅，即係呢個就香港嘅康文署做嘅嘢。 咁啊，當中亦都有個私人做嘅志蓮淨苑，亦都令到地區多人好多困擾。即係你過分管又唔得，但你太鬆又唔得。點樣先吸納咗人其他？好似例如我哋去美國紐約嘅中央公園啊，等等啲都好靚，亦都舒服，啲人都行得好好咧。嗱，我覺得呢個係吸納你當咗有啲段數講係吸納下人哋經驗。我期盼住，當我哋個附例嘅時候咧，過嚴唔得，過鬆唔得。點樣過程當中咧？去除香港而家現在由我哋嘅康文署做嘅公園管理嗰種咁嘅陋習咧，我成日笑香港嘅公園係有啲殖民地嘅一個方法，全部圍住，你最好唔好入去。我係好討厭呢啲做法。但點樣幾者之間做得好咧？所以我就希望當附例嚟嘅時候，我希望政府答我，提早先同我哋講講先。唔好你成個例之後咧，我唔係唔信民政裏邊啊，我始終對民政你管屬下嘅康樂我有意見，我想講。你睇你摩士公園咧，5號公園係笑話嚟嘅，我唔喺度講啦。咁所以我就建議政府你臨當去拍好似你草以前咧，都嚟我哋度，或者分堆話啲同事聽下。我期盼住，當你15年上附例前咧，係俾我哋先知先，因為我哋真係香港嘅經驗唔係太好經驗嚟嘅。當然香港有啲地方有好經驗嘅，我咁講又唔得嘅，有啲公園都好嘅。我想強調一樣嘢。所以我想強調一樣，例如我琴日好悶，我上山頂去個日式公園，好正，好好。又例如我去到香港公園，亦都正嘅。即係我要肯定香港有啲好嘅，但問題有唔好嘅更多添。所以我建議即係政府係啦，民政答我能否係提早俾我聽。另外亦都希望西九邊答我，係咪俾啲模型我睇睇咧？我唔想淨睇平面，唔想咁快樂話好還唔好，唔該。
好，民政
Very happy to provide you with the models, and also just to say that clearly, the evolving of both the park bylaws and the management philosophy will be important parts of the public communication. We will keep parts of the site open as we develop it, and it partly addresses Mr. Shea's question. Clearly, being able to keep that northern part of the site there from early in the piece will also give us a good way to be able to model in a smaller sense some of the issues once the more bigger section of the park is being completed. But happy to do so.
民政打一陣。
多謝主席。雖然即係立法會多數都會成立專責嘅小組委員會嚟到審議嗰個附例，但係如果我議員講又需要我哋同西九管理局當去草擬咗個附例，都會攞嚟，就會攞嚟諮詢大家嘅意見。唔該。
OK。下一位何楚蘭。
唔該主席。個公園咧，即係其實本來西九就成個西九都係要嚟做公園嘅。咁呢個構思即係當時都相當受歡迎。咁而家即係做咗一個文化設施，咁我哋都支持嘅。咁但係一個公園呢，亦都確實喺呢個文化區嗰度呢，佢就唔係其他任何一個香港其他嘅公園，係應該有一個發展文化、培育文化嘅使命喺裏邊。咁而裏邊嗰個佈局同埋管理都係重要嘅。即係佈局方面，我哋點樣平衡佢可以做到一部分同另一部分之間有別有洞天嘅感覺，可以好自然咁區隔開嚟，互不干擾。但係另一方面又唔好擺晒即係政治花槽喺度，就係要嚟阻住唔俾你，即係大堆人即係群集埋一齊，就係要擺好多磚啊或者大花盆啊喺度，即係令到你只能夠小組咁就喺度傾偈。咁呢啲我哋都係唔希望嘅。咁嗰個公園成個公共空間裏邊呢，係應該係可以讓唔同嘅活動都各司其職。咁而最緊要就係有機去生長，有機去管理。所以即係我哋呢，就真係高度推介。我哋立法會收到有20個團體同埋200幾位香港市民俾我哋嗰個意見書。咁佢裏邊呢，亦都係講咗有一啲香港以往康文署嘅附屬法例呢，其實係扼殺咗好多自由嘅活動，例如即係唔准玩樂器啊，又或者係即係你喺嗰度嘅活動呢，係一定不能夠有金錢交易啊咁。咁呢啲都即係唔係一個最自由嘅管理公園嘅方法。 咁我就希望管理局咧喺成個睇呢個公園嘅佈局同埋做附例嘅時候咧，都真係要廣納民意。普通市民你要徵詢啦，但係文化界佢哋有啲邊個形式嘅活動係能夠最想個公園嗰個佈局係如何能夠配合到嘅，同埋嗰個管治個管理個方面係希望點樣鬆綁嘅，咁我都請管理局係要喺成個過程裏邊去尤其徵詢文化界咯。唔該，主席。
OK， 阿 Bonnie。
多謝主席。想回答翻，其實回答翻頭先范議員提出嘅，同埋而家何議員提出嘅啦，就係其實即係喺嗰個我哋
下次你答咧就答翻問題嗰個議員，因為你用咗佢嘅時間，佢又向我投訴㗎啦。
唔係一樣啫，一樣嗰個問題，即係話點去回響翻文化界，琴日你哋入咗嚟立法會嗰封信啊，咁我哋其實琴日已經啱啱見咗我哋個諮詢委員會嗰個專責小組咧，就係關於呢個 engagement 啦。咁就阿黃英琦喺度嘅，咁我哋已經係約咗咧，話佢會幫手咧係約即係有份簽署嗰封信嘅好多嗰啲藝術家咧，咁嚟一齊。連同我哋嘅設計師係一齊去睇翻呢啲圖啦。我哋而家有一個設計圖喺度，就係等佢哋去俾意見，係點樣可以最好地運用呢一個公園。
OK，
咁即係嚇。
好啦，再冇補充。如果冇補充咧，我諗最後咧，我嘅意見咧就係話。我哋呢個公園咧就同頭先個 M+ 有啲唔同啊！呢個即係好明確定咗位，有個定位。頭先嗰個就冇啊。咁呢個定位咧係主係話我哋設計師點樣去即係能夠達到去呢個願景同埋使命，呢佢哋嘅寫低出嚟嘅目的。咁剛才介紹咧好詳細啦，咁有20幾個 slide。但係咧，我始終都係覺得咧，即係單憑睇個 slide 都唔夠。好似頭先有委員講咧。我哋希望咧，遲啲咧就能夠有一個 model 咧出嚟，因為咁樣會清晰一啲。因為仲有啲問題都未解決，譬如話嗰個即係可達性咧。譬如話呢個公園佢又冇一啲呢啲路咧，係咪每一處地方都可能咧喺緊急嘅時候咧，有緊急車輛可以救援嘅時候咧，可以達到係可以好短時間咧，可以即係幫到一啲有需要嘅居民咧，係咧。咁呢啲情況都係即係除咗佢靚之外咧，你都要係有嗰個實用啊，同埋方便到市民。咁其實呢個圖嘅設計咧，同原本 Foster 嗰個設計咧有啲唔同嘅。雖然 Foster 嗰啲咧成個森林咁好多樹，但係而家就冇咁多樹。但係呢啲樹唔緊要，你咁樣設計都有你哋嘅概念，我覺得都尊重你嘅概念。但係有冇考慮到香港嘅天氣咧，同埋呢個位置咧？香港有颱風，如果打一場風，會唔會又全部冧晒？咁你又要去做過晒，咁會嗰個價錢係點咧？即係呢個唔係話發生冇可能發生嘅，因為香港周時我哋見到尋日落一場大雨，都有啲樹冧咗。咁變咗我哋喺呢個設計上邊點樣又滿足到你個設計，又可以應付到即係香港嘅天氣同埋呢塊地嗰個地理環境咧？咁我哋希望即係西九管理局同埋設計師嗰邊咧去注意呢樣嘢。咁我哋期望着咧，你盡快可以即係俾到個即係設計嘅模型啦。第二咧，關於嗰個 bylaw 嗰度咧，嗰個附例咧，係咪即係希望咧不久將來咧都可以拎上嚟俾我哋睇？咁呢個就可以即係同大家頭先講咧，我哋可以詳細啲講嗰個公園嘅管理嘅問題。因為而家講個管理問題咧，就係比較空泛一啲，好嘛？中而嚟講咧，我好多謝即係兩位設計師專程喺外地嚟香港同我哋解釋啦。咁我哋好多謝你嘅解釋。 你仲有咩？
好簡單一個問題啫。頭先陳友仁議員即係話希望有個模型睇。
我講咗咯。
我知道。我想提第二樣啫。我想問而家即係設計師嗰邊咧，因為而家用 CG 即係模擬，用電腦模擬咧，其實都係普遍嘅。嗰個其實會即係喺嗰啲樹木啊、周遭嗰啲嘅建築物嘅比例嗰啲咧，係能夠更加可以協助得到我哋去 visualize， 即係去想像或者係去理解嗰個具體嘅設計。呢度設計師嗰邊係咪都係會應用喺未來日子裏邊協助我哋啦，或者係西九管理局喺設計呢個公園嗰陣時係會應用得到？如果係嘅話咧，嗰啲資料俾我哋咧係會幫到好多好多嘅咁樣。
我諗咧就俾唔俾我哋另外一件事啦，就係總言之你嘅意見好好嘅，我哋希望咧即係如果能夠做個模型出嚟之後咧，喺呢個電子嘅模型裏邊咧都有一啲三維空間嘅電子模型俾我哋睇每一個部分嘅詳細嘅表現啦，好嘛？嚇！咁喺呢度咧，我哋都再次多謝大家。Mr. Lynch, anything?
Could I just make one point in regard to the trees? Clearly, the discussion of climate and trees has been a really important part of developing both the design. But your point, is very important. The nursery that we put in some 18 months ago on the site has some 1,500 trees in it, and although they've grown substantially over the period of time, part of the purpose behind the nursery, which will become the temporary park over the course of the next year, was to test the typhoon resistance of those trees. Clearly we've had good response, and the view from West 8 and the DLN team is that most of the trees that we had put in the nursery will be able to be used and will be able to be planted as they've developed.
好啊，多謝你。咁我多謝你哋嘅出席。咁我哋呢個議題咧就完成。咁喺會議結束之前咧，我都想詢問下大家咧，因為頭先都仲有好多問題存在啊。咁咧，係咪大家同意咧？我哋都寫信俾兩個 panel 咧，就係要求呢個小組咧，喺下一個年度咧，我哋都係繼續去即係繼續去開會，係進行我哋個工作。大家冇反對啊嘛？嚇，如果冇反對咧，我哋就寫信俾有關嘅委員會，好嘛？好多謝大家，多謝。